What if literally everything we believe about, good people creating good societies is just completely backwards?
I mean, it is a really comforting assumption, right? We just assume virtue is natural.
Yeah, exactly. Think about it. You look at a low crime city or a community where people actually trust each other, and the default reflex is to just point and say, look at those highly civilized, inherently nice people.
Right, like it's a genetic trait or something.
Yeah. We treat a well-functioning society as if it's just the natural byproduct of a population having a really lucky cultural temperament.
Which is, well, it's a completely flawed way to look at human history. We frame virtue as this binary thing. You're either a good person or you're not.
Right.
And by extension, a society avoids collapsing into corruption simply by, hoping the majority of its members are naturally good.
Which is exactly the myth we are tearing down today. Welcome to the deep dive. We are unpacking a genuinely fascinating framework today.
It really is. It changes the whole paradigm.
It totally does. Specifically, we're looking at Lecture 13 out of a 17-part series that analyzes a very specific text. It's Surah Al-Ankabut, Ayat 45.
That's 29.45 for those keeping track at home.
Right, 29.45. But let me be absolutely clear right out of the gate here. We're not approaching this as a theological sermon today.
No, not at all. If you read this purely as theology, you honestly miss the actual architecture of the argument.
Exactly. We are treating this text as an operating manual for civilizational survival. We're looking at it strictly through the lens of sociology and, well, basically systems engineering.
Systems engineering is the perfect way to phrase it, actually.
Because the premise laid out in this lecture is that restraint from wrongdoing, whether that's street-level crime or, high-level corporate corruption, is not innate. It is an engineered output.
Virtue at scale is not a happy accident of character. It is built infrastructure.
Built infrastructure, I love that.
Because when you study how societies actually function or how they fail, relying on the innate niceness of human beings is a proven recipe for disaster.
Yeah, history is pretty clear on that one.
Right. A society doesn't survive by crossing its fingers and hoping its members play nice. It survives by actively building and maintaining a systemic discipline.
A discipline that continuously orients human conduct toward governing law.
Exactly. So for you listening right now, I want you to put on the hat of a systems architect.
Yeah, think like an engineer today. If you've ever looked at a broken institution, a failing state, or even just a toxic corporate culture and wondered why it collapsed despite having supposedly good rules on paper.
This breakdown is going to reveal the actual mechanics behind that failure.
So to understand how virtue is engineered as infrastructure, we really have to look at the code. This lecture breaks down the exact grammatical formula provided in the verse.
It moves us from these overarching sort of philosophical concepts down to a highly specific input, process, output logic.
Let's get right into the weeds then, the grammar of the system. Because the formula from 29.45 is, well, it's remarkably precise.
It really is. It pairs two distinct inputs to produce one measurable output. Let's start with input one.
Okay, lay it on me.
The word used in the text is utlu. Now, traditionally, you'd see that translated simply as to recite.
Right, like reading something out loud.
Exactly. But this framework argues that translating it as mere vocal recitation completely misses the functional point. The actual meaning is to internalize the book.
Internalize it, so not just saying the words.
Think about it in terms of cognitive load or like systems processing. Utlu isn't about vocalizing syllables into the air. It's about keeping the operating manual live and in active memory.
Like loading software into a computer's RAM.
That's the exact analogy. You are loading the software into the system's RAM. It represents a continuous, active awareness of the governing principles.
Keeping the code accessible so the system can run it dynamically.
Right.
I want to stop you there, though, because jumping from recite to loading software into RAM is a pretty massive leap.
It sounds like a jump, yeah.
How does the author actually justify pulling systemic infrastructure out of what billions of people practice as a daily religious reading?
Well, the justification comes from observing the historical and sociological results. The empirical data, basically.
Okay, how so?
If vocalizing the words was enough, any society that simply chanted the rules loud enough would be completely free of corruption.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a sharp point.
But history proves that's not true, right? The linguistic root of the word implies a following, a tracking, an internalization that leads directly to action.
So it's like a blueprint.
Exactly. If you have a blueprint for a bridge, Reading the blueprint out loud doesn't build the bridge.
Right. You can't just chant steel beams and expect a bridge to appear.
You have to internalize the dimensions to actually pour the concrete.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. So the internalized manual loaded into RAM is input 1. What's input 2?
Then we have input 2, which is Aqim al-Salat, the collective discipline.
And the lecture is relentless here. I noticed it emphasizes over and over that this is not about performing a physical motion.
Not at all. Aqim literally means to establish, to make it stand, to build it. It's the operationalization of a law in the real world.
So you have the manual, which is the first input,
Right.
and the second input is running the protocols described in that manual collectively.
Yes. It is the systemic infrastructure that binds the community together under that specific law.
Which leads directly to the output. When you have those two inputs running correctly, the text says it produces restraint from two specific things.
Farsha and Munkar.
Right. And this distinction, to me, is where the sociological brilliance of the text really shines.
It's a very precise diagnostic tool. Fasha represents private, sexual, or social excess. It's the internal, personal breakdowns of conduct.
The localized corruption, basically.
Exactly. Munkar, on the other hand, refers to public wrongs. These are the structural crimes.
Systemic fraud, economic exploitation.
Yeah, the kind of mass predation that destroys a community from the outside in.
Let me try to map this out with an analogy, because I think the traditional passive interpretation of that first input really, it neuters the actual power of the text.
Go for it.
Imagine a nuclear power plant. You've got a really comprehensive safety protocol.
Okay.
Pinning that protocol to the bulletin board in the break room doesn't stop a reactor meltdown.
No, it definitely doesn't.
The engineers could literally stand in a circle and recite the safety manual out loud every single morning. They could chant it perfectly.
But the plant is still going to explode.
Exactly. It's going to melt down if their behavioral discipline, what buttons they push, how they monitor the control rods, doesn't align with the steps written on the paper.
That is the exact dynamic the tape is highlighting. The words on the paper, or the sound waves of a recitation, they possess absolutely no magical shielding effect against radiation.
The shielding effect is the behavioral output of executing the manual.
Right. The text is demanding an empirical result.
But the architecture doesn't stop there. The lecture introduces a third element, which it calls the master regulator.
Yeah, the largest input of all.
Zikrullah Akbar. The awareness or remembrance of the law is the greatest. And the lecture spends a lot of time defining this word, Akbar.
It really strips away the poetic, spiritualized translation of great and defines it as absolute sovereignty.
Absolute sovereignty, that's a heavy term.
In a systemic context, Akbar means there is no ruler, no authority, and no law above this master regulator.
It acts as the ultimate constraint on the system.
Exactly. When a society operates under this principle, it means that the subjective desires of a population or the whims of a dictator, they cannot override the foundational code.
The lecture uses the muezzin calling from the minaret to explain this, and I found it totally fascinating.
It's a great historical reframing.
When the call of Allahu Akbar rings out over a city, the text argues this is not meant to be just a religious chant floating over the rooftops.
No, it was originally meant to be a revolutionary declaration of sovereignty.
A public territorial announcement that no other oppressive human authority applies here. The governing law is supreme.
But that declaration requires evidence, which brings us to the concept of shahada, or bearing witness.
Right, because you can't just declare it and walk away.
Exactly. The lecture connects this declaration of sovereignty directly to a courtroom setting.
I love this analogy.
In a court of law, if you take the stand and the judge asks, "Did you see the event occur?" and you say, "No, but I heard someone else talking about it," what happens?
You are immediately thrown out. Hearsay is entirely inadmissible. You are
But
dismissed.
you can't bear witness to something you didn't experience.
So to give shahada to bear witness means you must have actually observed the objective reality of the thing.
And this framework argues that bearing witness to this systemic discipline means you must actually see its objective results in reality.
You cannot just chant its name and claim the system exists.
You have to see the lack of munkar, you have to see the restraint from fasha.
But wait, this brings up a massive logical problem. If the inputs, the internalized manual, and the operational discipline are supposed to guarantee the specific output of societal restraint,
Right.
what happens when the output fails? Let's say a society claims they're doing all the inputs. They are reading the manual, they are doing the motions,
Okay.
but the city is still full of structural fraud, munkars everywhere, the nuclear plant is actively melting down. What then?
This is the pivot point of the entire lecture. It leads directly to the objective test of the system,
So it's basically demanding an audit.
a ruthless empirical test. The text completely refuses the superstition that words have magic power independent of structural reality. It brings the whole process before the engine of reason.
The rational claim being, if a society claims to be running this discipline, but predation and excess persist, then the discipline is either misconfigured or it is completely formal.
It's fake.
Right. There is no partial credit for just going through the motions.
The verse states that the discipline prevents corruption. Therefore, if corruption is not prevented, the discipline is not functioning. The effect of the system is the restraint it produces.
If there is no restraint, there is no effect. The system is broken.
The lecture highlights a specific Arabic word to describe this exact failure state, tasna'un.
Tasna'un. It translates to what you manufacture or what you fake, right?
Yeah, it's pure formalism, doing things strictly for the sake of appearance,
The text refers to it as Ria al-Nas.
performing for the eyes of the people without any underlying substance. It describes a society engaged in a massive, hollow pantomime.
Let me throw another analogy at you to capture this Tasna'un concept, because it honestly reminds me of sitting on a train.
Oh, the train schedule analogy, yeah.
Imagine you are sitting in a passenger car. You have the official train timetable in your hands. It tells you exactly what stations you were supposed to hit and at what times.
The manual is perfect.
The manual is flawless. But the train you are actually sitting on is heading south, and your destination is straight north.
So the infrastructure is pulling you in the exact opposite direction of your manual.
Right. So what does a person trapped in formalism do in this situation?
They don't pull the emergency brake.
No. They just sit there, clutching the timetable, and they start loudly reciting it to themselves. Next station, Northville at 10 a.m.
But they look out the window, and they are flying past Southburg.
And when the stations passing by the window don't match the schedule, what is the logical conclusion?
You don't blame the stations. You don't assume reality is somehow incorrect.
You realize the engine is pulling you the wrong way.
But the people practicing Tasnon just keep reciting the timetable. They convince themselves that the act of reading the schedule is the objective, rather than actually arriving at the destination.
The lecture argues that ritualistically repeating the manual while the actual society derails into corruption is the ultimate civilizational failure.
You are basically putting on a theatrical play about a working system while living inside a broken one.
Connect this back to the good person myth we discussed at the top. This is why hoping people are just naturally nice is a systemic failure.
A formalistic system provides zero load-bearing infrastructure.
None. When real pressure hits a society, say, a massive economic downturn or political instability, a society built on fake formalism collapses immediately into predation.
Because there is nothing actually holding human behavior back.
The safety protocols were pinned to the wall. They were never hardwired into the control room.
Okay, so if we establish that this discipline absolutely must produce real-world objective results, the lecture then takes us into some really wild territory.
Yeah, it scales up massively.
It asks, how does this zikr, this active awareness and safeguarding of the law, actually deploy in extreme scenarios?
Because it's easy to talk about discipline when times are good and the economy is booming.
Right. But the text expands the dimensions of what this discipline looks like, far beyond just following civic laws in a peaceful city.
It scales up to dismantling tyranny. And then it makes a massive jump to harnessing the physical universe.
It scales up, because once you accept that the system is meant to produce empirical reality, you have to account for the ultimate disruptions to reality.
Which are oppressive regimes and the brutal constraints of the physical world.
Exactly. Let's tackle the oppressive regimes first.
The lecture brings in the story of Moses and Pharaoh, but again, it strips away the traditional cinematic, Charlton Heston vibe.
There's no mystical staff waving here. It frames Moses and Pharaoh purely through the lens of power dynamics, resource monopolies, and systems engineering.
In this framework, Moses wasn't instructed to establish this discipline just so he and a small group of followers could pray quietly in a corner and feel spiritually fulfilled.
He was deployed into a deeply hostile system. Pharaoh represented absolute tyranny, a total monopoly on resources, and the systemic exploitation of the underclass.
Moses was instructed to establish the discipline, the zikr, specifically to build an underground systemic revolution to surface against that tyranny.
There's a linguistic detail here that completely changes the narrative.
Oh, the part about his brother Aaron.
Yes. When Moses asks for his brother Aaron's help, the traditional reading often framed it like he just wanted a companion. Moral support for a tough job.
Like a sidekick.
Right. But the lecture zeroes in on the word tasbih. It points out that asking for Aaron wasn't about having a partner to sit and count prayer beads.
Tasbih, in this analytical context, means moving with immense kinetic energy toward an objective.
It represents the gathering of maximum energy, resources, and structural fortitude.
Moses is asking for operational backup to confront a globally dominant, oppressive regime.
He needs to build a counter-system that generates enough kinetic energy to break the tyrant's monopoly. It is resource mobilization, not idle chanting.
It's building the infrastructure of resistance. Think about any major historical shift, the anti-colonial movements of the 20th century, for example.
You don't overthrow an empire with good vibes and poetry.
Exactly. You need logistics, communication networks, underground economies. You need kinetic energy.
The lecture extends this to another historical example, the Battle of Badr.
Right. It notes that standing firm on a battlefield against an overwhelming, oppressive force without your ranks breaking is defined as the ultimate execution of the law.
It is zikr in that moment. The discipline isn't something you suspend during a crisis.
The discipline is the very mechanism that allows you to survive the crisis.
Because if the master regulator, Zikrullah Akbar, the absolute sovereignty of the law, is truly loaded into the system's RAM, then the physical presence of an oppressive army doesn't override your operational code.
The system holds. The output of the system under extreme pressure is courage and structural integrity.
But then, right after establishing this groundwork for revolution and structural integrity under fire, the text makes a pivot that honestly gave me whiplash.
Yeah, I had to read that section 3 times.
It jumps from fighting tyrants on a battlefield to studying astrophysics.
How on earth does studying the cosmos fit into a sociological discipline? It feels like we just changed the subject entirely.
It feels like a leap, but within the internal logic of the framework, it is a perfectly linear progression.
Okay, walk me through that.
The text argues that studying the heavens, the earth, and the alternation of night and day is a core, non-negotiable part of this discipline.
So science is the ultimate zikr.
Precisely. Think about the overarching goal: establishing a society free from predation and dependence.
Right.
To do that, you have to master the environment you exist in. The physical universe operates on unchangeable laws of nature.
Discovering those laws and utilizing them is how a civilization builds real, tangible power.
The lecture draws a really stark line here. It argues that if a society ignores scientific research, if it fails to harness the hidden powers of the physical universe, it will inevitably be left economically and socially dependent on others.
And within this framework, becoming dependent on another nation for your survival, for your technology, for your agricultural output, that is a catastrophic failure of the system.
It's a profound point about sovereignty. If you do not study the alternation of night and day, which the text uses as a broad shorthand for the scientific method physics, agriculture, engineering,
you cannot build the load-bearing infrastructure required to maintain your independence.
your safety protocols are entirely useless if you don't even understand how the reactor works.
Therefore, scientific inquiry isn't some secular side hobby. It is a foundational, mandatory requirement of the discipline. Neglecting it leads directly to systemic collapse.
Look at modern petrostates as an analogy.
Oh, that's a perfect example.
You can have nations with massive wealth pulling oil out of the ground, but if they don't develop their own scientific infrastructure, their own engineering talent, what happens?
They have to import literally everything. They have to import their technology, their weapons, their medicine, their food systems.
They have money, but they have zero actual sovereignty because they haven't mastered the physical universe themselves. They are entirely dependent.
And that dependence makes them vulnerable to the exact kind of public, Munkar, structural exploitation the system is supposed to prevent.
Which brings us to the inevitable question. What happens when a society just fails to do this?
What is the penalty for failing to run the system correctly?
If a civilization ignores the science, ignores the justice, and lapses into that empty, formalistic ritual.
Just loudly reading the train schedule while heading south.
Exactly. We hit what the lecture calls the closed loop of consequence, the law of requital.
Mukafat e amal.
Yes, the law of action and reaction applied to human sociology.
The lecture introduces this concept of the narrow life, Maishatan Danka, And again, there's absolutely no mysticism here.
It explains that the consequence of turning away from the operating manual isn't some invisible curse raining down from the sky.
It is literal mathematical socioeconomic collapse.
The narrow life means economic misery. It means shrinking resources, extreme poverty, and as we just discussed, total dependence on others for basic survival.
If you fail to harness the laws of nature through science, and you fail to harness human potential through just sociological laws, your economy mathematically must shrink.
Your civilization's life becomes narrow.
I love how vicious the text is in its critique of people who try to romanticize that failure.
Oh yeah, it pulls no punches there.
There is this pervasive tendency in human history to look at poverty and say, oh, it's a test of character, or to elevate destitution into some kind of spiritual virtue.
The lecture sharply rejects sentimental poverty. It argues that economic destitution pushes humanity close to absolute ruin.
It degrades human dignity and forces people into predation just to survive.
A correctly engineered system should produce abundance, not artificial scarcity. The lecture points out the literal root of the word used for blessing in the text Mubarak.
And the root imagery isn't a glowing light from heaven.
No, it is a lush, heavily yielding agricultural field.
The system is engineered to provide dignity, honor, which it calls sharaf, and economic stability.
If the output is poverty and dependence, the system is failing. Claiming that the poverty is somehow virtuous is just another layer of that fake formalism.
It's just more Tasna'un. It's making excuses for a broken machine. Oh, the engine isn't broken. It's just building our character by making us walk.
No, the engine is broken.
Which leads to this incredibly powerful quote cited in the lecture. The author references a modern writer, via Iqbal, and it perfectly encapsulates this entire historical dynamic.
The quote about worn-out ideas.
Yes. The quote is, "The verdict of history is that worn-out ideas have never risen to power among a people who have worn them out."
That is a staggering concept. Let's analyze the mechanics of that.
Yeah.
What does it actually mean to wear out an idea?
Based on everything we've discussed, wearing out an idea happens when a community takes a brilliant revolutionary operating manual.
A manual designed to overthrow tyrants, harness astrophysics, and build an equitable economy.
And they reduce it to empty mechanical rituals. They exhaust the idea. They wear it out through repetition without execution.
They strip the code of its executable functions. They turn a dynamic operating system into a static museum display.
Exactly. They put the manual in a glass case, they shine a light on it, and they just look at it.
And the verdict of history is that once a community does that, they can never use those same ideas to rise to power again.
The ideas have been exhausted by their own formalism. The people have essentially inoculated themselves against the revolutionary power of the text by turning it into a habit of empty recitation.
The consequence tracks exactly with whether the system is being run or merely performed.
If you are just performing the discipline, the history of civilizational collapse from the Bronze Age to modern failing states shows you will experience the narrow life.
Predation returns, public wrongs, Munkar flourish, and structural collapse follows.
The loop closes on itself. The law of requital is inescapable.
Okay, let's pull all of this together and synthesize the core argument of this deep dive.
We started by looking at this foundational text not as theology, but as an advanced operating manual for societal stability.
And the permanent principle derived from the lecture is undeniable. Restraint from societal wrongdoing is an engineered output.
It requires a rigorously maintained discipline combined with a live, active awareness of the law. It is never, ever just a happy accident of character.
That is the permanent constant. The input-process-output logic does not change.
However, the framework also accounts for the variable of change.
While the systemic mechanics remain constant, the specific practices, the scientific applications, the technologies used to harness the universe, those must continually evolve to meet the material needs of a changing world.
The manual tells the agent how a just society keeps itself just. It provides the systemic logic.
It doesn't just give you a static list of what to wear or what primitive tools to use while you do it.
The infrastructure must be load-bearing, and that means it has to adapt to the physical realities of the present moment.
Whether that's studying new astrophysics, developing artificial intelligence, or designing new economic models to prevent modern exploitation, the discipline must be live.
It demands empirical reality over superstitious formalism. If the output isn't there, the inputs are flawed. It's that simple, and it is that demanding.
So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
We've spent a lot of time talking about historical shifts, Moses and civilizational collapse. But I want you to bring this down to your own reality.
Look at the organizations, the communities, or even the companies you are part of right now.
Are they relying on the lazy assumption that good people will just do the right thing?
Or have they actually built the load-bearing infrastructure, the real systemic discipline, to make predation and corruption impossible?
If you look around and realize your organization is just hoping for the best while completely ignoring the actual mechanics of human behavior.
Well, you might just be sitting on a train, heading south, loudly reciting the northbound timetable to yourself.
And wondering why the stations outside your window look all wrong.